All right. Hello, everyone. It's been a while. Thanks for joining me. I guess like the people watching right now are like the few people waiting for the stream to start, and then those of you watching after the fact. So, unfortunately, while I would like to just launch straight into the tournament, we do need to build a little bit of time for some viewers to get in so that we have proper voting for it. Because uh, if the title is not clear, we're going to do a tournament voting on every DC crisis that there's ever been, which, I think will be a lot of fun, and I think we can look forward to that. But I do want to I think that only works if you got a decent amount of people voting. So I thought I'd start us off kind of going over the stories and what we'll be covering, and then we'll kind of get into the tournament and that sort of thing. For those of you that don't know, my name's Arden. Thanks for joining us here on Comic Island. It's been a good long while since I've been streaming, so it's fun to be back, and I'm looking forward to doing this. Uh, the only downside to something like this is it does kind of depend on audience participation, and it has been a little while. I've been away from the channel for a little bit, so we're just gonna kind of see how this goes. If it really isn't kind of working the way I hoped, I do kind of have a backup thing in mind if absolutely necessary. But yeah, for now, I do kind of want to leave it to the viewers. And if it goes the way I want it to, like I don't really have the ability to vote in these polls, so it's going to be entirely on you guys to decide which of the crises in DC history you like the most. And so, what does that include? So on here, I kind of really like this disambiguation page, as it's called, on the DC database. Fandom. I'm aware of the problems with this wiki website, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, it's not terrible. We're going to be able to talk a little bit about uh, these stories, and it's a nice list, I think, of the crises and what I would consider a crisis event, because there is a lot of debate as to whether and what counts for that. So we're just going by this. It's not necessarily a perfect list of them, but it leads to a nice round 16, which is great for a tournament, and that's all I really needed. So we're just going to go with it. So the first one is the Crisis on Multiple Earths. I guess I'll go through each of those specifically as their rounds come up and stuff like that. But we start with that, then we go into the Crisis of Infinite Earths, then the other comic book crises, that includes Identity Crisis, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis. It's easy if they have Crisis in the name, but there's other stuff that definitely should count, like the Flashpoint event, like Dark Knight's Metal and Death Metal, the Dark Crisis, obviously, even Heroes in Crisis. This page counted them all. I'm not really going to split hairs about them. They're all on the list. These preludes here and this tie-in thing, those I didn't count. This is part of the Dark Knights event down here, so we don't really need that. And all of these can easily be lumped into their associated events. So out of those, we have a nice even 12. But I did kind of have in mind all those other crises in the animated movies and in the CW stuff. So of those, the guy this random Smallville episode. Uh, Sorry, I'm getting stuffed up for a second. Haven't been all day, and then all of a sudden I'm live, and my nose is clogged, but that should pass in a second. Smallville's Crisis episode is more of a reference to what's going on with Lana Lang and that story at the time, and doesn't really evoke any sort of crisis style event like everything else we're talking about, so it is not here. But the Justice League Crisis on Two Earths movie, which is came out way back in 2010, that's on here. Infinite Crisis, I wanted to count, but unfortunately that game is completely defunct. I have played it, but it was only online and available for like less than a year. So I couldn't put that on. I didn't think that was fair because only so many viewers are going to have played that game. So we're not counting that one, but we are counting the Crisis on Earth X event from the Arrowverse, as well as the Crisis on Infinite Earths event from the CW shows. And then finally, to round it up, the three movie uh, Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths animated thing they did last year. Um, okay. And so, we also, so those are the 16 we're doing. So I got distracted. We got our first comment from Caesar of Rome. I remember you from other streams, so it's glad to see you're back. And for him, it's OG, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Final, Infinite, Metal, Zero Hour, and Heroes in Crisis. So that's an interesting prelude. I'm going to try and be a little neutral. Like, I'm going to be honest about stuff. If I know a story is really popular or unpopular, I'm going to talk about that. But I'm going to just kind of try and let you guys vote as you please. So, with that in mind, we can kind of wait to get a decent amount of viewers. I don't really know how accurate my information is here anyways, so once the poll started, it doesn't have a time or anything like that. Here we go. Okay, great. So, round one is going to be Crisis on Infinite Earths, the comic book edition. And Dark Knight's Metal, also a comic. All right, so that poll should now be posted for everybody. And yeah, it just goes until I'm ready. So we'll just kind of have that up, and then I'm gonna, yeah, like we'll figure out who our first winner is as people vote. But in the meantime, let's talk about these two stories. So first up is Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, I'm guessing if you clicked on this video, you've probably heard of this event. It's like the banner event, as Caesar put it in chat. It's the OG version, so yeah, it's a pretty popular and well-known event. Here, I'll put up the little nice image they have here of that spectacular cover. Oh, right, and also I have it right here. I just happen to have this trade sitting behind me in that little wall of comics that I got over there, and I thought it would be funny to just yeah. So, Crisis of Infinite Earths, blockbuster event that completely reshaped the DC universe. Really, really cool comic overall, and lots of interesting aspects to it, memorable moments, lots of things to like, in other words. Rock solid story about the Anti-Monitor coming to Earth and everything kind of unraveling. It just goes on because like it's been built up over the years on this wiki page. But yeah, it's this huge big event. Caesar says Crisis of Infinite Earths is one of the few events that's longer than 6 issues that doesn't feel like it's wasting time. That's a good way of putting it. I was recently rereading it and got to about here, and there's so much that goes on. There's big, like, entire issues deal with a separate universe and how they're dealing with things or something like that, and it feels vast and sprawling, and that, if anything, it could have been bigger than this book. Like Caesar said, like it lives up to its length pretty well. So it's going up against, unfortunately, a pretty heavy hitter as well. I say unfortunately kind of for it, though. Dark Knight's Metal is a relatively recent event, especially compared to Crisis of Infinite Earths. It's all about I always say it wrong, Batos or whatever it is, this demonic entity from the dark multiverse clawing its way into our reality, and all these evil I guess Batmen who became a sort of dark Justice League led by the Batman Who Laughs are running around doing evil things in the Prime Earth, and it's a pretty fun event. It's definitely had a big influence on things at this point, in the sense of it introduced the world to the Batman Who Laughs, as well as the Dark Knights, who are all pretty cool. Those are the like evil Batman who become a Doomsday or the Red Death and that sort of thing. So I would argue personally, and like I said, I'm going to try and be neutral, but in this case, I don't think it'll affect things too much, that they're both solid events. Crisis of Infinite Earths is going to have the advantage because it comes out ahead for so many like little obvious reasons. And yeah, can I see how okay, interesting. So while I would argue both are pretty competitive, just I did these rounds randomly. I literally just typed in all of the potential crises and told this Bracket HQ site to do it at random, knowing that there would be situations where two really strong stories might go head to head in the first round, and it's just up to them to compete. And I'm okay with that. I think that's kind of part of the fun. Okay, so we've had the pull up for a few minutes. I'm going to just kind of let it go for a little bit. I don't really know how YouTube goes in terms of like announcing people to the algorithm. I scheduled the stream. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes in. I started a little early, but I did schedule the stream for 3:30, so we'll let that simmer for a little bit. DZS93 says Heroes in. Nah, man, just kidding. It's Infinite Crisis easily. And yeah, that's interesting in terms of Infinite Crisis. We will get to that when we get to that. It does look like it's pretty solidly leaning towards the Crisis of Infinite Earths at the moment in the voting on our page. So I'll let it sit again for a bit, but yeah, I kind of could see, it's not a surprise looking over this. Crisis of Infinite Earth seems like a pretty strong finalist. Metal, I thought would be pretty strong, but I didn't really think it was going to be winding up, getting all the way to the finale. And yeah, I'll let it sit on the bracket just so you guys can get a sense of some stuff. I will be interested to, like, Infinite Crisis, as people have mentioned, is going to be pretty competitive. Stuff like Heroes in Crisis, probably not so much. And Dark Crisis, I don't know how people feel about that. I kind of view it as pretty mid-range, so I don't see that being super competitive. I could see Flashpoint being pretty strong, though, and maybe even some of the adaptations could have some legs in all of this. I'm not really sure how y'all are going to feel about that or where that's going to go. So, uh, yeah, Caesar from of Rome says, I feel like Bacchus Knight should have been included. That's a good point. I don't see it on here. And I could see the argument for it. I didn't think of Blackest Night specifically. I did think of other event stories. I was thinking of Absolute Power. It's not exactly a straightforward crisis, but it does have some pretty serious implications into the multiverse. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out as being like, potentially arguably a crisis, but that's kind of why I said at the beginning, like, it is what it is. We're using this one list because if I start splitting hairs about what should or shouldn't be on here, then you could easily argue Heroes in Crisis shouldn't be on here. It just happens to have the name Crisis in it, but it's kind of used in a different way. So, you know, I uh I think there's a debate out there for that, but uh I personally lean towards we're gonna stick with kind of what's on here just because the other side of that is there's nothing that stops me from finding some other list on some other website and doing this again with a different tournament. And because of the way seeding works, uh if we do this with slightly different entries or even the same entries and I hit that random button again, we're going to get completely different results. They're going to go up against each other differently. Sure, we might end up with the winner, but the actual polling is going to be pretty competitive. All right, so um, I was having an internal debate just now. Okay, more viewers are trickling in, so I will kind of leave it a bit. I am wondering, like, I didn't really think about how long I wanted each poll to run. I kind of just had an idea in my head of like, well, as more and more viewers trickle in, eventually the polling results will look a certain way, and I'll have a certain amount of votes that I'll feel satisfied with moving on. But I didn't really have a specific end game in mind for that, so I'm thinking we'll just let it go for a few more minutes and then move on to the next round. And then as we have more viewers kind of trickling in and stuff, I'll start to accelerate this a little bit. And we'll just go through each round pretty quickly because there should be more and more votes. And yeah, as I'm talking, more and more votes are coming in. And it doesn't really, it's kind of funny because part of what in my brain is like, oh, the data will kind of skew towards it being like 50-50. And once it's kind of more competitive, then I'll know that a decent amount of people have voted. Well, that's not going to work for something like what's happening right now where I'm getting more and more votes, but everyone's doing Crisis of Infinite Earths, and that's fine. Everyone agrees it's Crisis of Infinite Earths. That's making me more and more confident that we're going to have a pretty clear result of who's the winner of this round, and that's fine. It's just unanimous, and that makes sense because yeah, metal's got its cool aspects to it and that sort of thing, but I definitely would say that like Crisis of Infinite Earths has a much bigger influence on DC history. It's got people all excited, and at the end of the day, Metal is kind of a more modern DC event where we've got some big hype, we've got some interesting characters, and there was good follow up to Metal, unlike some other DC events. But there was the actual ending and structure of the Dark Knight's Metal story itself is nowhere near as satisfying or as impactful as Crisis of Infinite Earths. Great. So, interesting. Diza says, "Did my vote not count? I voted DKR." You mean Metal? If you voted Metal, I don't actually see that on my end. So let me see if. Okay, that will end it. Interesting. Okay, hang on a second. Let me grab my phone because right now I'm seeing 100% of votes for Crisis of Infinite Earth. So I'll let that. It might just have not shown up on my end yet, but I will check if, like, if I go on to the stream from YouTube, uh, if I see different results because that's concerning. um, Here we are. Okay. Concerning. Oh, do you guys not see the results of the poll as it's going? That's weird. Wait. No, but you have to be able to. Where's the poll? Or is it because I'm here? Hold on a second. It knows I'm Comic Island. Switch account. Oh my god, hurry up. There we go. Okay, great. Go to this. No. Okay. Oh, without affecting. Yeah, I'm seeing on both ends 100% votes for Crisis of Infinite Earths. And I'm seeing that as the results, like on my phone. um, okay, interesting. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, Jesus. I would kind of, well, yeah, like, hmm. Oh yeah, so Jesus is saying you misclicked. I was about to say I think you misclicked because I can't change my vote on my phone. So, but now just be now to be fair, if that mattered, I could always like just enter the results in differently. But obviously, it's still gonna skew towards Crisis of Infinite Earths, but it's not unanimous. And I was gonna kind of score it. Unfortunately, I don't. Oh, okay. It's just pronounced just. So just 93. I gotcha. No problem. But yeah, so it's gonna be for Crisis of Infinite Earths. I don't really know the percentage that way, but I hear 5/6, 83. Okay, so 83 to 17, percentage wise, Crisis of Infinite Earths wins the first round. Okay, great. So now we move on to the next one, and that poll is going to be. Oh, cute! It even shows the results. All right, round two. So next up is the Crisis on Infinite Earths animated version. So that is the 2024. Oh, whoops. Typing this in wrong. It's animated. And it's going up against the Crisis of Two Earths, or a Crisis on Two Earths, I guess. 2010 animated movie. So just by coincidence, we have two animated movies going up head to head against each other, uh, which is interesting. So, first up is the three-part Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's a pretty faithful recreation of the Crisis on Infinite Earths story, I suppose. It's got a lot of little extra details to it, I guess, and is this massive three-movie trilogy that kind of covers the Crisis of Infinite Earths as part of the kind of short-lived, I think, Tomorrowverse era of DC movies that basically ran from, yeah, I can see it here. I wasn't even sure, but 2020 to 2024, and kind of ends it and reboots things. Um, so I've generally heard mixed things about these three movies, and personally, I kind of felt they were pretty mid. It's hard to describe, but just because it kind of does a lot of faithful things from the original Crisis of Infinite Earths doesn't mean I found it that entertaining. I kind of found it dragged out, and it just doesn't quite read the same as a comic. That's a personal choice, but to each their own. Um, I'm kind of seeing in chat there's some people agreeing with me here. In comparison, Crisis on Two Earths is pretty dang fun. It's a little more ingrained in the older, uh, I guess, DC animated like stuff from the 90s. It's not that same cast. It's kind of got its own thing going on, but uh, it's just part, and it's part of like the 2010s animated movies that DC just put out for a good long while. Things that do stand out for me is James Woods' performance as Owlman. Really strong, really got a few memorable scenes as Owlman. He's such a nihilist in this story. I found it really well done. I like, and this kind of was my introduction to the what are they called? The Ultraman's team. The here it's what are they? The Crime Syndicate. I quite enjoy them. I'm seeing a lot of votes going pretty overwhelmingly towards that the Crisis of Two Earths 2010 movie. I also found it cleaner, a little easier to enjoy than the three movie structure. So I'm not surprised that the voting's kind of going in this direction too. We might have another pretty unanimous verdict on that one. So I'll let it run for a few more minutes, but I would be surprised if there's a big change. Caesar says, I like that they're the superpowered mafia. I never watched Infinite Earths, but Crisis on Two Earths was my childhood. I watched that thing almost every day. I could definitely see that. By 2010, I was like 21 years old, so I definitely just kind of watched it on a lark, but I do remember watching it the year it came out, and I actually was quite impressed with it, even as a young adult. So, I definitely, and yeah, Justice saying the same thing. Didn't watch Infinite, but Two Earths was pretty dope. I agree. We've got a few more votes in since I started talking, and it seems pretty unambiguously for Crisis of Two Earths, or Crisis I. I'm going to keep saying that wrong, but y'all know what I mean. And it might be 100-0 kind of thing, like a unanimous but like unambiguous endorsement for the Crisis of. Oh, I even typed it wrong on the poll, but Crisis on Two Earths movie over the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Is that right? Now I'm not even sure how any of them are said. Okay, on is the right word. I'm sure I'm going to say it wrong a million times with the wrong preposition, but that's okay. We can all live with that. And yeah, I'm not really seeing any word of protest in chat or on the polls, so I think we can go with that one pretty quickly. And yeah, like I said, we'll start to speed it up now that more people have come in. I'm kind of getting a more consistent voting stream, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. Oh yeah, even a couple more votes are trickling in right at the end. All for Crisis on Two Earths. All right. So, round 3. Thank you for joining us, Mr. DC Comics 1908. Round 3 is going to be a pretty interesting one. It is Oh, wait, no, it's not. It's Final Crisis against Heroes in Crisis. I changed my mind about this being interesting because almost certainly this is going to be an easy win for Final Crisis. I will get into why as soon as I launch the poll. And there it goes. So happy voting, everybody. I'm sorry I'm kind of laughing it off, but I think a lot of you will know why. Final Crisis is Grant Morrison's big story. It deals with pretty much I can't say straightforward, but the overall plot is pretty straightforward. It's mostly just about Darkseid attacking Earth. Caesar says Final Crisis is the most underrated event. I agree in the sense that while most people out there who have read Final Crisis and talk about Final Crisis do so positively and do like it, I don't hear about it much at all. In the wide world of, all these crisis events and all the ones we're talking about, I hear people talk about pretty much every other story we're talking about today way more than Final Crisis. And so that's why I agree. Yeah, it's underrated as all heck. It's a and yeah, it's a pretty cool story. The things like that real like it's so big, and that's something I kind of want to talk about. One thing that's really helpful about this disambiguation page is it talks about how many issues are involved in the overall event. And even though it's 57, there's also like all the follow up to it where Batman gets killed but really blasted back in time. There's like a murder mystery element to it, especially early on, as I recall. And a lot, Grant Morrison tells these stories in this big and epic way. Caesar is saying, also appreciate it, particularly in this climate. Yeah, and there's a certain dread to it all that I definitely appreciate. And in contrast, we have Heroes in Crisis that I very recently just talked about in the worst of DC Rebirth video that I made. I blanked on the word rebirth for a second. And thank you all, by the way, for all the nice things you guys said about that. And that video got a lot of support. It's been good to be back, and I really do appreciate that. Yeah, Caesar was saying it's nice to have a story about the forces of good winning over fascism when it comes to Final Crisis. And I do agree, because there's that dread of, like, not just Darkseid taking over, but this inevitable power and all these villains coming in and kind of kicking in the door. And that's why I kind of was calling it straightforward. Like, it's not straightforward in its storytelling or in its themes and how big it feels, but it is straightforward in that good is triumphing over evil, and in a refreshing kind of way, because a lot of these crossover DC events should be that, and more straightforwardly that. And a good contrast to that is Heroes in Crisis, a well-meaning story by Tom King and Clayman about how there's this farm where superheroes are being treated for mental health purposes and are kind of like, it's done in a non-judgmental way. And then it turns out Wally West killed them all because of a mental breakdown, and DC basically had to walk back this story. That's something I kind of didn't talk about in that worst of Rebirth video that I put out recently, but some people pointed out in the comments, and it's absolutely true. So, yeah, for all those reasons and many more, like let's just put it this way: uh, Tom King is no Grant Morrison. So I am seeing, without even, yeah, like Final Crisis is beating out Heroes in Crisis pretty unambiguously for this one. I would have been really surprised if anyone's going any other way about it. Mick Squizzy's saying Identity Crisis. I assume a lot of people are jumping into chat kind of saying what their favorite one is, and that'll be interesting because that is coming up soon on the bracket tournament. Um, oh, no, it's not. I was looking at Infinite Crisis. It's actually last up in the preliminary rounds, so that will be interesting. Yeah, that's what Miss Squizzy's saying. That's cool. We will talk about that more when it comes, I'm sure. Right now, I do encourage you to vote in the poll and stuff because we are doing Final Crisis against Heroes in Crisis. Caesar saying most of Heroes in Crisis looks like that Invincible panel joke. Oh, wait, I think I get what you're saying. um, but yeah, I would argue that's Heroes' best strength. Is its art looks really good when you're looking at these big scenery things. The way Clay Mann does those like title sprawls and it says Heroes in Crisis and like skywriting is very beautiful and impressive. But the core of the story is not great. And if we're talking about art, Final Crisis has cool art and some really interesting design choices to it. And yeah, I really like it. So okay, that's been 5 minutes, which is kind of roughly what I've been running these polls at, and I think we can pretty safely give it to that one. We might not even really need scores. I thought they might be more informative, but so far it's been pretty straightforward in terms of the results. People have been pretty unambiguous about some of these early ones. I expect once we start getting into the semi and quarterfinalists, that will change quite a bit. All right. So let's move on to round 4. Oops. What is round 4? Okay, so Infinite Crisis and 0 Hour. All right, that is posted. So, Infinite Crisis is one that I've been very interested to see how it's going to do in this video and how people are going to feel about it because it is huge. It is the biggest one, I think, by a wide mile at 125 issues. The next highest one is Convergence with 90 issues. And it certainly feels that way. Unlike Final Crisis, which is relatively straightforward in that you can kind of summarize it in a single sentence as Darkseid is attacking Earth, Infinite Crisis is a much more complicated kind of song and dance. I guess, like, at its core, it's about the hero, like the characters from Crisis of Infinite Earths, like Alexander Luthor, Lois Lane, and Superboy Prime, kind of returning and coming back for revenge. But it's a bigger story than that. It's a like more epic reveal to get us to that point and get us to understanding what exactly is going on. There's a lot more going on with the like society of supervillains exploding in numbers and it feeling like them all like really organizing and really putting up this united front against the villains, or not against the superheroes, all the villains standing up to sorry, I got it turned around. And so pretty cool story. I guess it's written by Jeff Johns, but I say I guess because it's such a big and broad story and because there's so many moving parts to it, there are a lot more writers and creators involved. On the other hand, Zero Hour is an older story. Sorry, Infinite Crisis came out 2005 to 2006. Zero Hour came out in 1994. So for me, Zero Hour is kind of like Crisis on Infinite Earths and that sort of thing, where I kind of knew it a lot more by reputation before we actually really got into like reading it ever and learning about the specifics. But Zero Hour is kind of like Infinite Crisis in that there are a lot of moving parts to it. There's a lot going on. It could broadly be summarized as Parallax trying to like completely rewrite the universe and fix these things that he feels is wrong, and Parallax being Hal Jordan at the time. But then there's also like another supervillain kind of running around, and it ends up kind of being another reboot for DC's continuity, but in comparison to Crisis on Infinite Earths, a much more minor one. So it's got a lot of complicated and moving parts to it. It's written by Dan Jurgens, who's got a big long history in DC Comics at this point, and yeah, Jerry Orway did a bunch of stuff for this book too. A really cool story overall that is a little big and broad and dense. And so it's not perfect, but I would also point out Infinite Crisis is not perfect. And this is the first time where it hasn't completely gone in one direction or another. For a while I was talking, it was actually tied in the polling. So Caesar says, I have a lot of nostalgia for Infinite Crisis, one of the first comics I read, but I found Zero Hour to be mostly boring. I can definitely see why. And I definitely think Infinite Crisis has more energy than Zero Hour. Zero Hour is interesting and has its moments. I like, is this the one? Let me double check before I say this. Yeah, it counts backwards. So we start at issue number 4 and it goes down to 0. So it's got like interesting little gimmicks in that. And I like how, because it's older and weirder, it focuses on less traditional characters and is like a more odd like side of the DC universe compared to like the more traditional modern crossover events. So I don't hate it, but I definitely see why people are kind of leaning towards Infinite Crisis in the polling at the moment. So Caesar says the only thing I cared about Zero Hour is the post Zero Hour reboot of Legion of Superheroes. And that's, I think, where there's some more interesting aspects of it. DC Comics kind of used this Zero Hour and this event to clean up their continuity and I guess we'll say fix some things that had cropped up after the Crisis on Infinite Earths reboot, and I often hear that kind of affectionately referred to, or characters kind of improving radically post Zero Hour and that sort of thing. Mick Squizzy says, "Imagine the new DCEU doing a Crisis film." I can imagine that, and I kind of feel like James Gunn. I don't know if he's building like in a straightforward way to that, but I do think at some point it is in the cards. Like if he's able to build the DC. Oh, you're talking about the DC EU, so the Zack Snydery one. That's interesting. I kind of feel like Snyder was also potentially building to like a Final Crisis kind of thing before that was canceled. Just says Infinite was crazy good. Yeah, and there's a lot of very memorable and cool moments to Infinite Crisis. I was kind of just defending Zero Hour a little bit just to provide that side of things, but I do agree with that statement. Like there are really cool aspects to Infinite Crisis as well. Okay. So I'm not sure what Nick Squizzy's like. Yeah, I'm not sure. You said, wait, yeah, you're right. So I'm not sure what you mean, but it is interesting thinking about either side of them. Either the current version of the DC, I guess it's called DCU now, where James Gunn takes on a crisis event is pretty interesting to think about, and I think quite possible to happen within the next decade or so. And the other side of it is thinking about like what that Zack Snyder crisis would look like, and it definitely feels like he was going there too. Yeah, Mick Squizzy meant the DCU. Well, luckily I answered both, so it works either way. Okay, so I think that's definitely going to Infinite Crisis at this point with 83% to 17. It was like 50-50 when the polling started, but it definitely has tilted towards Infinite Crisis at this point. Um, so, for those of you just joining, that's where we're at on the poll right now. Current quarter finalists are Crisis on Infinite Earths, Crisis on Two Earths, the 2010 movie, Final Crisis, and Infinite Crisis. Pretty cool set of stuff so far, guys, I gotta say. Nothing I would disagree with much personally at all. Oh, here, the poll's still open, so the score is slightly changed from 86 to 14, skewed even slightly more towards Infinite Crisis. Amon Hayes, thank you for joining us. We do have some more people creeping in, which is kind of fun because I do feel like that might snowball over time. Like on my end, I'm just seeing a kind of steady growth in viewers. So like by the end, we might have a strong number of people voting and a bit of hype built up into this tournament or something. I don't know. Who cares? So we are moving on to round five. So I'm going to end the poll. Round five starts with. There we go. The Crisis on Multiple Earths, which is a really interesting. Oh, we're actually on. Wait, hold on a second. Yeah, it is round five. Okay. My chat's just being weird for a second. Round five. So, Crisis on Multiple Earths versus Dark Knight's Death Metal. Interesting. So, let me get that poll up. Let me check something too. Okay, it is showing up. It was just being weird. As I would like you guys to be able to see the results as well. All right, so of our two here, Crisis on Multiple Earths is interesting because it's not a real story per se. It's kind of a retroactive name given to a series of stories told before the Crisis on Infinite Earths, where there would be two universes in the multiverse colliding in some way and having a battle. So that includes stories like Crisis on Earth X, random stories where like someone from Earth 1 might come to Earth 2. So we have like Solomon Grundy, who used to be a Earth 1 character, I believe, fighting with Superman from Earth 2, if I have that all right in my head. Or the Flash of Two Worlds, which kind of kicks off this story and starts a lot of this. A lot of classic stories. Gardner Fox was credited on the cover of this one here. There's multiple different variations of the trade. So this Crisis on Multiple Earths Volume 1 covers the same stories as Crisis on Multiple Earths crossed over. So it's just different ways of looking at these early stories. They aren't really unified as a larger narrative, but in hindsight, they actually work very well at building us up to the Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's tons of recaps of the DC universe that like DC has put out in different comics over the years and have very clearly like used this story and this time period to suggest that there was more and more activity between the between universes in the multiverse that led to these barriers kind of weakening, allowing for the Crisis on Infinite Earths to happen. And I kind of like that. That's a fun little detail of DC continuity, a fun little like aspect of retroactive continuity that lets some classic Justice League comics have a little bit more meaning to them. Why not? Just a little bit of fun. And speaking of just a little bit of fun, we have Dark Knight's Death Metal. So this is the sequel story of sorts to the Dark Knight's Metal story. In a lot of ways, they're very similar in that they're all about like these larger than life takes on alternate versions of evil Batman, evil other characters. Superman is what happens to him again? Because I know like Batman becomes a Black Lantern. Wonder Woman's really the only one who's still okay out of the three of them. And Superman is infected either with the anti-life equation, I believe, or the Doomsday virus. I can't quite remember which, but you get the idea. Everything's falling apart. Reality has basically died. Perpetua takes over the entire multiverse and remakes it with the Batman who laughs, who then like gets a hold of a version of Bruce Wayne who's like Dr. Manhattan and puts his brain in Dr. Manhattan, so he becomes the main villain of this story, and then all of reality gets rewritten. It's honestly, as a story, I would argue in terms of like its mad ambition and craziness might even compete a little bit with what's it called? Like the Crisis on Infinite Earths. I'm not necessarily saying one is as good as the other. I think we can agree probably the original Crisis is going to take that challenge, and maybe even in this actual tournament. But it was fun. I have all those books. I was going through my box. We have them in storage, so they're not here on me, unfortunately. But those old covers with the holographic stuff, and when this story was coming out, I was having a lot of fun. There's so many creative characters that show up in this. A sentient Batmobile, Joker dragons that I believe Wonder Woman rides into battle, or maybe that was Batman, one of them. It's just such a fun story with so many details to it that I'm actually getting them mixed up talking about them. So out of these two, it actually was leaning towards Dark Knight's Death Metal quite a bit, but it is a little more competitive right now because I would argue both of these stories are pretty strong in their own way. I think personally, I might lean towards Death Metal, but I see people voting for Crisis on Multiple Earths as well, and could see the argument for that too. So that's an interesting one. Oh, it's getting tied right now. Okay, it's kind of going back and forth. I will let that simmer for a minute. Just 93 confirms it was the anti-life equation Superman was infected by. I think that's what was in my brain, and then the cover threw me off for a second, even though he does have the dark side eyes going. Whatever. Caesar says I have zero experience for either with either. That's fair. I kind of get the sense that some people like such as you are not voting in the ones that you don't have an opinion on, and that's reasonable. We actually landed on a tie. It was going back and forth quite a bit, so I'll let that go for a minute. I can always break the tie. I haven't actually voted any of these outside of the first round just to kind of make sure everything was working, but I could do that. Just 93 says, I really don't get the hype behind Infinite Earths because of the dated ass dialogue. Yeah, I get what you're saying. There there is interesting like aspects to that where it is like, what is this date? Like when it was, I know it was in the 80s. Oh, 1985. Um, that is a side of it. I didn't really think about it when going into this, but as of this year, this story is 40 years old, and that definitely might affect things. And we'll see actually how well it does in the finals. I might, based on how that first round went, have kind of assumed that the advantage would have gone to Crisis, but I could be wrong. Okay, well, let's see how voting's looking. Okay, it might actually go to Crisis on Multiple Earths. I mean, we've had the poll running for a little bit, so I will open up the bracket page and kind of just start entering it in, but it might be going to them. I haven't closed the poll yet, so you guys can still vote before like it's all quite firm just yet. But yeah, it looks like. Oh, and I did spell that wrong, but I don't think I can edit that easily, so I'm just gonna leave it. Whatever. I know what it means. And this is just like for me to keep track of what's what in each round, anyways. All right. So, oh, it got tied again. Okay, hold on, hold on. um, how long has this poll been running? Okay, 7 minutes. However, I am currently showing on my screen that we have more viewers right now than people voting. Oh, right, because I guess some people don't know both stories well enough to feel like they vote. So I might have to come in and break the tie. Well, get to, I guess. All right. So, yeah. Now I have to sit here for a second and be like, what do I actually prefer? Just 93 said another tie. We hadn't actually hit a tie yet. This is our first, I believe. Um, oh, or you mean that we backslid into a tie? That is funny. I kind of yeah. So like, sorry, I'm stuck for a second because I'm not actually sure what I prefer. Because on the one hand, there are some really fun stories in these Crisis of Multiple Earths, and some of the interesting ideas they have with that, and what they do to play around with the different ideas. The idea of the Justice Society being part of one Earth and being like the original version of Superman from the 30s, then transitioning into the Silver Age, being part of a new Earth, and the more modern version of these heroes is really fun to me. That like all of that is very cool. So it's hard to totally discard that. But on the other hand, I also really enjoyed death metal. I found it had a lot of ambition. I love the art. It's uh, one of Greg Capullo's better comics because it's just so full of creativity and wild characters and ideas that he gets to go really fun. There's this whole metal verse created here, and yes, it's over the top and silly, but it knows that and it leans into it in the best way possible. Honestly, kind of airing out my feelings about the two, I think I'm gonna have to break the tie for death metal. I just had a little more fun with it. As much as I appreciate the Crisis on Multiple Earths, I think I'm gonna have to break the tie for that and give it to death metal. So interesting stuff though. First time I've actually had to do that in a way that affected the results. But by 43 to 57, it goes to death metal. Cool stuff. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. So now we move on to round six. Now, round six I see is our first taste of the CW, and by random chance, both of these CW crises wound up on here. So can I just like, no, I cannot copy and paste from there. That would be helpful. So we have the Crisis on Earth X, an Arrowverse crossover, and the Crisis on Infinite Earths, the other Arrow crossover in this tournament. So unfortunately for CW fans, only one of them is going to make it past this round, but that could have happened with anything, and is just part of the game. And part of the fun about we could always kind of do this again at a later date and get very different results because these aren't necessarily going to go head to head with each other. So these ones, I quite enjoy both of them, to be honest. I'm not even sure what my personal preference is. We'll have to think about that if it actually comes to another tie again or something, because I don't know. Crisis on Earth X starts with the wedding between Barry Allen and Iris West, and ends up being this whole story about the Earth X invading and all of these evil fascist versions of our main characters trying to take over, and them just having a lot of fun with multiversal hijinks. And the Crisis on Infinite Earths is just another Arrowverse crossover that they started to make an annual tradition of. This one's a lot bigger. It's got a lot more ambition to it. There's a bunch of random cameos from outside of the CW verse that are a lot of fun. There's cool details to it, like Brandon Ruth getting to play Superman again from the Superman Returns movie from the early 2000s. It's all just kind of the CW version of the Crisis on Infinite Earth story. So it brings a lot of the same ideas back, like Pariah's in this story, the Anti Monitors in this story, but it does it in their own unique way, which I think really works for it. You have also like these experienced comic book writers working on the CW story, and I think that makes a huge difference. Or they did it for Crisis on Infinite Earths. Um, I'm not sure who wrote Crisis on Earth X. Oh yeah, okay, similar people and stuff. So yeah, they both have that energy to them, and I could see people voting for either. I do see the voting pretty firmly leaning on Crisis on Infinite Earths though, and I kind of agree. I get why. Like it's just a bigger and more fun version of the Earth X crossover. So why not go for the one that has wild and surprising cameos in it, fun stuff. It brings in more stuff shows, because by the time we get to Crisis on Infinite Earths, there's just more of the Arrowverse at that point, and it's just an easier thing to enjoy. I do see one vote going for Crisis on Earth X, so it's not like unanimous or anything like that. Personally, though, I do think the later story is probably likely to win. Oh, it's only been up for a couple minutes though, so somehow I blew through the summary of those, because usually by the time I get through talking about my feelings of them, it's been like 5 minutes. But yeah, um, I don't have a ton of extra thought. Oh, hey, Tevye Smoka, long time viewer, thanks for joining us. Oh, the poll's jumping around a bit. My day's been going well. Hope yours is going well as too. Since you're joining us, I'll just show you. We're kind of not even midway through the tournament, and are currently voting on the two CW crises. So, Crisis on Earth X and Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah, so I will. It does seem to be slightly in favor of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It is interesting though. Earth X is kind of creeping up with some more votes here and there, and I can kind of see why. Uh, like as much as I think I prefer Infinite Earths, Earth X is also a more straightforward story and a little bit more linear. I do have to say this, since we got a couple minutes for the poll anyhow, to let a few more people vote if they want. Crisis on Earth X hinges a little more on the Barry Allen Iris West relationship, and however you feel about it, that's fine. I've been rewatching some of Flash lately, and I gotta tell you, their relationship and the whole thing about them being raised together and kind of brother and sister makes it so weird. like that's part of my problem with the Crisis on Earth X is that side of the Flash is so weird to me, and it's leaned on pretty heavily in the Earth X story enough that I think I prefer the Infinite Earths personally. It's got more going for it, and it feels like a big celebration of everything the CW verse pulled off. It kind of marks the beginning of the end for the Arrowverse, but in like a positive way, for Infinite Earths being like this big final celebration of all of that. And so I kind of lean on it a little more. Tevia is saying, honestly, Crisis on Infinite Earths was good, but only because the show gave me Superman and Lois show, which adapted my favorite series, Superman Rebirth, and was fantastic in my opinion. Um, and then says that Flash show was a train wreck. And that's a good point too. The casting around Superman and Lois and then launching that show is another positive side of Infinite Earths. That sort of celebratory energy of the second story does give it a little more energy over Earth X, which is, dealing with some pretty rough politics and stuff. Not that it has bad politics to it, but, you're dealing with Nazis. It's going to make the story feel and be a certain way when you have an episode in a concentration camp, for example, and that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. Tevia says, plus that Crisis on Infinite Earths felt like a way better adaptation than the DC animated Crisis on Infinite Earths, which was so disappointing. That's fair. You actually missed it, but the Crisis of Infinite Earths animated edition has already been eliminated in favor of the Crisis on Two Earths 2010 movie. But I agree, and that's actually something I kind of wanted to bring up. We're probably okay to close the poll, but I'll leave it for a minute while I talk about this because it is relevant. Because we have two different adaptations of the Crisis on Infinite Earths here. The first one that we talked about is actually the second one came out, but the animated one is much more faithful to the original graphic novel. And I think that makes it worse because Crisis on Infinite Earths in the CW verse had to adapt things, because they had to change things to fit the differences in the Arrowverse. It's more interesting. You don't really know when you're watching the CW version of the Crisis on Infinite Earths quite where the story is going to go, because they're in a different situation. They have different options, and like they're focusing on different characters, and they have different goals in mind for what they want for each of these characters. So it ended up being a very interesting adaptation of the original Crisis on Infinite Earths. And in comparison, the more faithful animated story, well, animated movies are different than this book. This is just a little random book, you know? Like, you can't, it's not the same thing. And so I think the animated movies are a good example of that. And the CW version doing that a little better makes sense to me for that reason. It's an interesting example of how to adapt a story well. And I think on that note, we can kind of give the victory to Crisis on Infinite Earths 60-40. Pretty straightforward one. All right. Tevye says, but here's the thing. That animated adaptation wasn't good adaptation because it changed some stuff and didn't do the story good. Also, the animated monitor they made into more than one entity, which was so dumb. That's fair, but I don't like. I guess my contention is the changes made for the Arrowverse show made sense for the Arrowverse show. The animated movie, I don't know why it was doing that, but I don't know if it needed to be one to one either. I guess I oversimplified that a bit, but I also just like didn't literally, but like have slept through the Crisis on Infinite Earths animated movies because I found them pretty boring. So, yeah. Anyways, we're gonna move on to round six, or that was round six. We're gonna move on to round seven. Dark Crisis and Convergence. Oops, that's a Q&A. So, I hit the wrong button. Dark Crisis had some interesting ideas and imagery to it. Oh, here's a good question. Okay, hold on. Let me start the poll. Get that going first. I will answer your questions first, and then we will talk about the stories a little bit. So I had to make a snap decision there. Tevye is saying, plus let's face facts, the animated Crisis trilogy didn't even do Barry Allen's Flash death right, and said, screw it, let's do Crisis on Infinite Earths trilogy connected to the Tomorrowverse. Yeah, like, that's fair too. I guess it also had similar burdens to the Crisis on Infinite Earths in the Arrowverse, but didn't quite handle it well. So, Caesar asked, do we count tie-ins or just a main series? For me, if it's just the main series, Dark Crisis, but if we include tie-ins, Convergence. Personally, I feel like you can use whatever criteria you'd like. We have talked about tie-ins. It has been relevant when we were talking about the size and scale of Infinite Crisis and stuff like that. So I would. If you haven't read the tie-ins, then you don't have to count them. Right? I mean, it's your tournament, guys, in the sense that you guys can vote however you'd like. If it were me voting, I would probably factor in the tie-ins. I consider them relevant. I consider them part of the story, and it's pretty important in the case of Convergence. And I think not necessarily fair to the story to not count them. It sort of set itself up to have a lot of tie-ins and to have these interesting tie-ins. So yeah, I think that's fair. Tevye is saying the tie-ins were way better in Convergence, in my opinion. Dark Crisis was just a mess and made no sense whatsoever. Right. So speaking of, let's talk about these two stories. Dark Crisis, I remember when it was coming out, I was kind of curious about some of the headlines and the covers that were being dropped for the story. You know, you had this whole idea, oh, the Justice League is being shut down or not, or killed or whatever happened. And I say shut down because while they tried to set it up as like, oh, the Justice League is gone kind of thing, it was pretty clear, you know, this is a comic book. we're in 2025 at this point. Well, I guess it's 2022 to 2023, but in general, in the 2020s, it's hard to believe the Justice League was gone forever. I think we can all agree. And so Dark Crisis, while it has some interesting ideas, kind of falls pretty firmly in the mid range for me. Convergence, on the other hand, hate the main story. Feel it's pretty low value nonsense about Telos running around on this ridiculous planet with all these little bottled cities from across old corners of the multiverse. And boy, does that main story not feel like it comes together in a satisfying way at all. However, if we scroll down a little bit, these tie-ins are very interesting. So what DC did is they kind of sectioned off their tie-ins into these big chunks. So we have tie-ins that take place before Flashpoint and the new 50, or from universes and stories, I should say, that take place from before the Flashpoint and before the new 52. Then we have stuff from before Zero Hour. Then we have stuff from before the Crisis on Earth One, and then we have stuff in like other eras from before, like the Crisis of Infinite Earths and that sort of thing. Really cool way of doing tie-ins where you have all these different little corners of continuity. I believe they introduced us to the current version of John Kent and Superboy and that sort of thing. Um, yeah, like and I'm mostly getting kind of a summary of what I was saying. Like Tevi is saying, if they really wanted to commit to the death of the Justice League, it should have just committed with their other books. I agree. It didn't really last long, and definitely didn't actually kill off their members. It could have been interesting. Like I don't. I really kind of feel like Dark Crisis missed the mark. It's interesting looking at this cover and seeing all these younger superheroes and thinking about, hey, like maybe they take over the Justice League and there's this sense of changing of the guard or whatever. I didn't really think it was actually there in the text much. It really just felt like the Justice League was temporarily taking a step back and the Titans were temporarily taking a step in. Caesar's saying the only good thing about the convergence is the tie-ins, and that's kind of the interesting challenge of this particular round, is the tie-ins are what drive this story. Almost entirely. I really feel like that main series dragged hard. um, Caesar was saying, I didn't expect it to be permanent, but I expected them to be dead for longer. Yeah, it doesn't even really last within the story, which I think is a bit of a problem for Dark Crisis. And so then they just kind of choose to keep the Justice League broken up just because the Titans handled the story, and kind of that's true, but it didn't really feel earned. And yeah, so it's currently tied in the polling, which is interesting, and I kind of can see it going both ways. Uh, yeah, I mean, it's been 5 minutes, and that's kind of the amount of time I've settled into running the poll for. Caesar says this is generally a tough matchup. I agree. Oh, it's okay. I was about to tie break it, but I might not have to. Looks like it's going to Dark Crisis, and that's interesting because I will be honest with you guys. Like it's right here. I have my phone out, ready to like potentially vote, and I didn't do it yet because it was tied. And I see it tying up again actually because it's pretty close. It was leaning towards Dark Crisis, and we got another vote in, and it seems to be doing that. Because I gotta tell you, well, okay, I don't want to bias it if people are gonna do it. But okay, well, if we're settling on a tie, I'm going to vote Convergence. As much as I dislike the main series, I also dislike the main series of Dark Crisis, but I definitely like the tie-ins and was more curious about them in Convergence over Dark Crisis. So I'm giving it to them. You guys can still vote until I like close out the poll, but for now it's leaning towards Convergence. But that was a really close one, and probably the like closer of them in terms of like going back. I guess like we've had two ties now. Tevi says I voted for Convergence for the tie-ins and the birth of Jonathan Samuel Kent. Makes sense. And yeah, that's where I'm leaning to for that guy. All right. And with that, let's move on to round 8 and our final like preliminary round. So, that consists of Flashpoint and Identity Crisis. I've had some favorable shoutouts to Identity Crisis at this point, but I think Flashpoint is a strong competitor too. Tevi says, also seeing Wally West Flash again made me so happy. Yeah, that's an important thing to remember about Convergence. It's Convergence has it at this point, but we can mention that. It's important to remember that Convergence comes at the tail end of the New 52, where a lot of these characters had been gone for years, and so seeing them back and returned is part of why Convergence's tie-ins are so strong and why they're so cathartic and fun. I think that's what really, personally for me, gave it the advantage over Dark Crisis, which on the whole was pretty disappointing. So, anyways, let's move on to Flashpoint and Identity Crisis. Now, Flashpoint is a pretty famous series at this point. It's kind of funny it didn't count Flashpoint for the animated tie-ins here, or like animated adaptations here, but I don't care. I'm not gonna correct that or anything. I could argue you could argue there's a reason for that even. So anyways, Flashpoint is all about Barry Allen going back and altering the timeline and as a result rewriting the entire universe into the Flashpoint universe. It's easy to think of it as just its core story because its core story stands alone pretty well on its own, but it is actually a full-blown event with 67 issues and all these tie-ins where we really get a sense of what the Flashpoint universe looks like. And there's some really interesting corners to all of it. The biggest differences is stuff like Thomas Wayne actually watched Bruce Wayne die in front of him, and he and Martha kind of each become Batman and the Joker, respectively. I found that really interesting. And the end result of the story is that everything gets rewritten into the New 52. So, kind of like the Crisis on Infinite Earths and Zero Hour, it is a significant story and has a pretty big effect on the canon and continuity. On the other hand, Identity Crisis, uh, while it kind of purports itself and shapes itself to be a bit of a crisis event, is sort of about the Justice League uh, finding Sue Dibney being horribly murdered, and so they assume Dr. Light is responsible for it and rewrite his memories, and then instead it turns out to be the Adams ex-wife Jean Loring. I have a lot of problems with Identity Crisis personally. I think it's interesting and it comes at a time when DC was trying to adultify its stories a little bit. I don't believe it does a great job of that overall. Hang on a second. Getting dark out there. I need some more lighting in here, I think. There we go. Where am I? Okay. So um, so some people have said some nice things about Identity Crisis earlier, and it even being their favorite event. There is an argument for all of that. I don't personally feel that way, but Brad Meltzer did write some interesting stories and was doing something interesting here, even if it was, I think, a little mishandled. It is an adult story, and it is taking its themes and darker aspects to it around murder and like violent crime uh seriously. So I do appreciate it for that, but I definitely enjoyed Flashpoint a lot more personally, and it does look like the polling reflects that. Flashpoint's fun, but also has like some decent moments of depth to it. That ending where Barry Allen gives Bruce Wayne the letter from Thomas is so moving, and one of my like favorite little moments between those two characters. It's really strong, and I do think it's got some interesting ideas to it with this world kind of being torn apart by war between Atlantis and Themyscira and stuff like that. I didn't hate much of Flashpoint. or even think there's that many weaknesses to it, and would argue it's one of the stronger crisis-ish events on here, so I can definitely see why it's winning. Um, where am I in chat? I might have missed some stuff here. Caesar says, for me, the main problem about Flashpoint is it's just a Flash story, but it matters for every DC character. That's fair. I would argue, based on what I was just saying, though, that this is a rock solid Batman story, even if Batman isn't in it for a lot of it. I would argue it's a very interesting take on Wonder Woman and Aquaman's characters. What they did with Superman was pretty interesting and memorable, too. So, I, 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 I don't agree. Like, everyone's opinions is, we're allowed to have and stuff. But I personally kind of feel that, yes, Flash is the protagonist of the story unambiguously, but it definitely sprawls out to the larger DC universe. I get the sense that this might have just been a fun idea for a Flash story that I think I've heard that before. I've read somewhere that that when it was like proposed, DC's editorial side kind of encouraged like them to like expand it into this bigger crossover. I could be wrong about that, but that's kind of what I thought Jeff Johns said about the story. Maybe not. It is kind of used as a vehicle for the new 52, so I could be very wrong about that, but it almost feels like that. Um, and I kind of like that side of it, though. And I guess I get what you're saying. Like, I don't want to downplay what you're saying too much, Caesar. But I almost like that we have an event where instead of it relying on the Trinity or Superman or any of those other like big characters, it's Barry Allen. Barry Allen drives a lot of the crises and is always a big part of those stories. But it's kind of neat that he gets to star in one all on his own. That was kind of cool to me. Um, just 93 says, controversially, I like both, but Flashpoint might be my favorite event ever. Well, that kind of gets into what I was saying. And Tevia is echoing that he really liked the moment at the end, too, where Thomas sends the letter to Bruce. Um, um, Tevia is saying Identity Crisis tried to do a mystery story but didn't really work, similar to Heroes in Crisis. That's a very good point. And I would say the two comparisons between those stories is very like that is very apt. Like they have a lot of the same problems and kind of end up in the same headspace like the way I think of them in terms of like they're both have weaknesses as stories, if that makes sense. They're not bad, but I definitely think that Identity Crisis and Heroes in Crisis, well, I guess they are bad. I think I lost focus for a second there. They have a lot of problems, and they both have the same kind of problems where we're dealing with these grim and dark themes, but we don't really have the maturity in the writing to fully grapple with the idea of murder or mental health issues and all the stuff that both of those stories try and deal with. And they kind of falter because of that. So on that note, I mean it's poll's been up for a bit and it is unanimously for Flashpoint. Whoever that was that earlier was talking about Identity Crisis, I'm sorry you couldn't stay with us for the rest of the stream. I don't think it would have made a difference in terms of the end result anyways. Round goes to Flashpoint. And with that, we move on to the quarterfinals. So, all right. So let's move on to that. Yeah, it is quarterfinals. It's like, is it quarterfinals or semifinals? Quarterfinal one. So we start with the original Crisis on Infinite Earths going against a personal love of mine. And so it's going to be an interesting one. Crisis on Two Earths, the 2010 animated movie. So we've introduced both stories at this point. So now I think it's more of just a question about how we feel about these two lining up against each other. We have this big classic comic book event, and I do understand why probably most people are going to vote for it because it has this big effect on the history of DC canon and that sort of thing. I don't want to be poo-pooing it, but I do have a lot of personal love for Crisis on Two Earths. That ending with Owlman, well, he just realizes he's lost everything and is about to die and doesn't even really care because he is, at the core, a nihilist. That's a solid ending to a story for me, and I do personally have love for it. okay, like I could see some back and forth, but I definitely think it's probably gonna lean towards Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I think really, as much as I personally have love for that animated movie, it's hard to budge against the classic. Someone was saying in chat though that they didn't love the dialogue from the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, so the, there, like, here's your chance. Like, I do think there's a strong other story here. But we'll have to see how people feel about it and how the polling goes, because I'm quite curious about this one. Oh, okay. We just had the two stories tie, so we'll have to see. But yeah, I'm curious. I'm taking a look at what some of the other matchups are going to look like. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, Caesar from Rome says some of the best George Perez artwork. Solid point. I like the animation in Crisis on Two Earths, but uh, you know, Cameron's usually pretty good at picking this stuff up. So we got. I mean, I just need to wait until. Yeah, like here we go. I mean, like really solid artwork, beautiful pages, and I can just go to a random page and find something cool to show off. This cover might not have been by George Perez, but still really interesting visuals front to back. Oh, I said that right into the mic. That might have been loud. I was leaning forward. My apologies. Um, okay, yeah, we'll let it go for a bit. Tevye saying, honestly, I think both are fantastic in my opinion. That's the problem. It probably should go to Crisis on Infinite Earths. You would like probably not have the animated movie without that original comic book story, but it's hard not to have a little bit of love for Crisis on Two Earths. It's a really entertaining film and uh, has a solid cast and is currently winning, surprisingly. um, that would be a big twist, but I do have to say, we were talking about it earlier. Crisis on Infinite Earths is 40 years old, and some of its dialogue might not necessarily hold up as well as a 2010 movie. So, okay, this has been probably the most competitive match yet because it started for Crisis on Infinite Earths, then it got tied, then it went to Crisis on Two Earths, now it's tied again. So, pretty competitive overall. And now my okay. Okay. Sorry, just YouTube's being weird for a second. I'm not entirely sure why, but I will just kind of hope that it's going okay. Okay. Okay, it's just being weird. It showed like no viewers for a second, and I was a little worried that I had lost connection. I'm gonna check OBS for a second. Seems fine. Okay, whatever. Tevi is saying, plus the Owlman speech with Batman was really awesome and badass. I really like what they did with Owlman's character in the Crisis on Two Earths. Uh, he just stands out as one of the better villains in any of those animated movies they've ever put out. Right up there with something like the Joker and Return of the Joker from the Batman Beyond movie or something like that. Just really well performed. Even like I'm scrolling through the cast list here, and even the jester at the beginning of this story was memorable, and you just get a sense of how different this world is because we have this heroic and happy Joker trying to do the right thing. It's fun. I was just curious about who voiced him. But I was talking about Owlman and just how strong his character is in this movie. And I really like his philosophy, how he kind of goes rogue almost even from the rest of the crime syndicate because he just truly wants all of reality to end. There's a lot to like in all of that, for sure. Debbie is saying, it drives me crazy. We still didn't get that art style for Crisis on Infinite Earth's adaptation because it was really good. That's fair. Tevi says that character got killed in Countdown to Final Crisis, which was an awful storyline. I don't know. I think I've read a couple of issues of Countdown. I've heard truly awful things. I don't think I really got into it myself. Those Countdown books never really seemed to catch my attention. All right, it's been 5 minutes and we are still tied, so it might come down to me. And I'll be honest, this one's tough. I can respect everything Crisis on Infinite Earths has done. I really like that movie though. Um, boy, oh, would I love just for someone to come in and take the decision from me. But I don't know. I'm tempted to either. Caesar was saying that Grant Morrison ignored it when writing Final Crisis. That's really funny. I didn't know that. And Tevye says, "Yeah, it's an awful storyline. I don't recommend checking it out." I had heard enough, and I did do. I know I've read a couple of issues. I remember doing that and being like, "No, thanks. I don't need to read this." um, yeah. If you can't tell, I'm stalling a little bit because I'm not actually sure like which one to vote for. Yeah. Usually in situations like this, I favor the older story. The older story is important for building us up to the newer story. And like I said earlier, like I don't think Crisis on Two Earths, the movie, would exist without Crisis on Infinite Earths kind of building up DC's brand enough to the point that they could be putting out animated movies regularly in the early 2000s. Tevi says, "Thank God Heroes in Crisis didn't win any rounds because it's so awful and a terrible storyline." Yeah, it was an easy loss as it went up against Final Crisis in that first series of rounds. Um, but yeah, so normally I'd pick Crisis on Infinite Earths, but I think part of me, like if the if I'm here to break the tie and I'm here to pick the story that I liked more, it should be Crisis on Two Earths. I liked that story a little more than the Infinite one. So I think I'm going to give it to Crisis on Two Earths. Once again, like people can vote if they want to vote and change that, but for now, sure, why not? Both are great, but I personally had a lot of fun with the movie. It impressed me in a way I didn't expect it to, and as fun as Crisis on Infinite Earths is, it's a little old and it's a little clunky, and I do appreciate it. It definitely deserved to kind of make it as far as it did, but I like that movie more. All right, I think that's the first real upset of the tournament, and that's kind of fun. Okay, so let's move on to the next quarterfinal round. Quarter final two. So that is Final Crisis going up against Infinite Crisis. Basically, the two big Crisis stories of like the 2000s and maybe 2010s. I don't remember their exact publication date. Um, yeah, uh, a really big one to go head to head. I don't know how people are going to vote for this. I don't need this anymore. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that anymore. But not straightforward at all. Oh yeah, so they're both from the 2000s. They're kind of back to back too. So, okay, first vote goes to Infinite Crisis because here's the thing. Final Crisis has Grant Morrison, has the big story and all of that, but Infinite Crisis is huge and sprawling, and like we said, tie-ins count, and there's a lot of really interesting things that came out of Infinite Crisis. Uh, Caesar says this one's probably closer for one of the closer ones for me, but I got to go final. I agree. It's closer for me. Like it's a tough decision. I think personally I might lead in the other direction, but right now it's leaning to final, and it's hard to disagree. It's a real close one. I kind of am like leaning back and forth. Tevye says, personally, I think Infinite Crisis is far better sequel than Final Crisis, and plus told a great epic story with all the DC characters, and a bonus, it gave us Connor Kent Superboy beating Superboy Prime. All solid points. I personally was leaning towards Infinite Crisis because of stuff like Secret Six at the time, because of the Joker and Lex Luthor messing up Alexander Luthor at the end of this story. That there's some really solid moments to Infinite Crisis that make it hard for me to just discount it and vote for the Grant Morrison story just because it's Grant Morrison and he's good at what he does. And don't get me wrong, that's a very good reason to vote for Final Crisis. Everyone's talking about in chat how close this one is. I think they have a solid argument. Caesar of Rome makes another good point that you guys should consider. because I was talking about Secret Six and stuff, but Grant Morrison's Final Crisis led to his Batman and Robin too, which is a solid argument. Because that's probably like that's one of the more important, if not the best, like Batman and Robin book out there. Um, and definitely like a really influential time for Grant Morrison, or for Batman, because of Grant Morrison's writing, I should say. Tevia Smoka says, Final Crisis, I think, is super confusing. Yeah, that is Grant Morrison's style. And so Grant Morrison, that I can't even explain what was happening in an event that um, did give a great moment with Superman beating Darkseid with singing. I forgot about all that. And that's part of the interesting side of Final Crisis 2 is like Grant Morrison is a writer like nobody else. He's got a very distinct style to him and energy. I can see people tell me all the time in comments or in person how either a specific Grant Morrison story let them down or just the writer in general doesn't work with them. And I get how that happens. I personally don't agree. I really like him as a writer. I think he pushes the comic book industry in interesting ways. He pushes other writers to challenge themselves a bit and to push outside of the typical like comic book storytelling. I think he amps up characters in interesting ways in stories like Final Crisis, and that does make him a cool writer worth checking out. Caesar of Rome is saying in chat he's my all-time favorite writer. Totally get that too. Like, and I lean more in that direction than the people who don't like Grant Morrison stuff. Uh, Morrison can also be a dense writer, one that's hard to decipher, one that's ambiguous and even sometimes vague in his writing. And so I can see, like, I don't agree with it. When people tell me they don't like Grant Morrison, I don't think they're being contrarian. I don't think they're being disingenuous or stupid. I think he's a very specific style, and that style's not going to work for everyone, which is fair. Which also might inform the results I'm kind of seeing here. Um, Tevi is saying, speaking of Crisis, that reminds me, how come DC Rebirth isn't in this list? The event was technically Crisis. So the reason for that is actually maybe overly simple, because someone was asking about Blackest Night as well, and Blackest Night is on here, and the reason is perhaps mind-numbingly simple, but here I have this disambiguous page for the Crisis event on DC's fandom, and I made it out of this list. It led to 16 stories across the whole page. And while that, and I kind of said this at the beginning of the video, but I think it's worth repeating now that we're like an hour and a half in. Uh, I didn't really question it beyond that. I just kind of plunked in these stories, had a little bit of fun with that, and then we can always look at a different list or a different version of what counts as a crisis another time. I do agree there's a strong amount of debate here, like why does Heroes in Crisis count, but like Doomsday Clock doesn't or Blackest Night doesn't? Because it's not on the page. It literally is as simple as that. There's no other hard and fast rules. I knew no matter what list would look like, no matter what we did and didn't include, people would have objections or disagreements. And the fun thing is, I can, type in list of all DC Crisis and pick a different website next time, and we can just do a totally different thing. And the reason for that is because, yeah, I don't think anyone would agree on what a crisis is. Like, is it supposed to be a red sky? Because half of the things labeled crisis don't count. Does it need to have crisis in its name? Because that excludes a lot of stuff that definitely should count. So it kind of becomes a is what it is situation when it comes to what is and isn't on this list here. Tevi says, Heroes of Crisis is also awful. Well, whether or not that matters, it's more of that Heroes in Crisis is a lot more grounded compared to a lot of these other Crisis events and doesn't reshape reality or anything like that. So whoever wrote this page, congratulations, you got to pick what's in this tournament. It's not an official tournament after all. It's just some fans and I expressing our opinions. So, that's why I didn't interrogate it any further. All right. So how long? Yeah, we've had this poll up for a bit, and it looks like it's going to Infinite Crisis. It was close. It kind of went back and forth there a bit, but point goes to our friend Infinite. And yeah, I can definitely see it going either way. I can see where people are coming from. Oh, it's actually even slightly more skewed to Infinite Crisis while I was talking there. 67-33. So that's 2/3 for Infinite Crisis. All right, so let's move on to our next round. Quarter. Oh, no, hang on. Quarterfinal 3. So, what do we got? Oh, yes. So we have Dark Knights, Death Metal. This is pretty interesting. I don't think I expected Death Metal to survive while Metal didn't, but that is what happened, and it's quite interesting. And that's going up against the Crisis on Infinite Earths CW edition, which is now the last Crisis on Infinite Earths still in play, which is also interesting. All right, so yeah, a pretty interesting set of two. I personally think I prefer death metal. It's just fun and ambitious and creative. But the Crisis on Infinite Earths, I was thinking about this earlier. We didn't talk about this in stream yet, but it is an achievement in television. It kind of feels like the crowning achievement of cable TV, given that cable TV is all but doomed at this point. The ambition and ability to have this many shows cross over, this many build up, to cross over with, or like at least have cameos from movie characters showing up and other TV shows outside of your own network. That is cool as hell, and there is something to be said for the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Death Metal also just has some cool visuals and interesting things, but it actually is going to the CW show, which is pretty surprising but pretty cool to me, guys. Like, I don't hate being surprised in the best way possible. That's fun, and that's a fun result. If we are, oh wow, yeah, like it's leaning pretty heavily towards the CW show, and that's cool. Tevia's saying, I thought Dark Knight's Metal would have won because that storyline actually made way more sense than its sequel, but that's just my opinion. The thing is, Dark Knight's Metal went up against Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I can see why it lost to that story pretty easily. And it seems like this might be it for Death Metal. Cool. I didn't necessarily expect that. I don't hate the result. I think it's interesting if the CW show is going into the semifinals and maybe even the finals. That would be a very surprising and cool result, but it is a cool crossover. Like I was just saying, what an achievement it was. Tevye saying, oh, so this is basically a no-win scenario. Yep, and that's part of the other fun about this tournament. I deliberately let it seed itself randomly, so all the matchups were just determined by random chance. And the really fun thing about that is there's no reason that we can't do it again and get very different results because of all of that, and get a very different looking tournament just depending on who votes for what, which is cool. I think that's a lot of fun. So, how are we doing here? Okay, so I've only had the poll open a couple of minutes. I didn't really think about that, but I think, we've been pretty consistently running them for 5 minutes just to give people a chance to vote and say what they want to say, maybe argue for something one way or another if they want to convince people of something. But the more we talk about these shows, the less we might have to say over time, which is just an interesting side of it. Um, and yeah, oh, Tevye is saying, as for Dark Knight's Death Metal, I thought it was a fine storyline, mostly because I read Scott Snyder's Justice League and I love this run, but Death Metal unfortunately came out at a bad time because of COVID, probably, or something. He's going to type out the rest, but you do remind me of something. Oh, here we go. Both Bendis and Superman run going on at the time, and the terrible 5G DC stuff that they didn't even end up ever really doing. That's interesting. I do think that's an interesting side to Death Metal. I liked it, but I also was on the pulse of DC at the time. I had been reading those Justice League Scott Snyder books that directly lead to the events of Death Metal. I had read all the other random side stuff that also leads into Death Metal, like the No Justice event. I was familiar with the original Dark Knight's Metal event. All of these things kind of lead into and build up towards the death metal story. And if you haven't read those things, if you just read death metal on its own, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense and doesn't feel like it has the same level of build up and payoff to it that reading those Justice League books and reading like 100 comic books does. But is that a reasonable thing to ask of a reader? Maybe not. And that's a pretty solid point to consider, that death metal does require quite a bit of backstory to really appreciate, even a little bit. Whereas Crisis on Infinite Earths, well, yes, it does benefit from all the build up, and you pretty much need to know at least some of the shows that are crossing over. That's kind of the point of the story. You shouldn't start with Crisis on Infinite Earths with the Arrowverse. You start with one of the shows and you let it reach that point, and then you can enjoy a pretty interesting crossover, even if you haven't seen all of the shows in question. Um, yeah. So, how are we doing now? Oh, um, so Tevia's making an interesting point. I won't get into the whole thing about it, but death metal also has some pretty solid tie-ins. We did mention that earlier in its first round, but I think it is worth remembering that too. As much as like it has problems, it also has some really, really cool tie-in comics and some really interesting ideas explored at the time. But with that being said, we've reached 5 minutes, and I think like it's pretty consistently gone towards Crisis on Infinite Earths for CW. So 60-40. It moves on to the next round, and we do our last preliminary round, which is Convergence and Flashpoint. So preliminary for Convergence and Flashpoint. So two pretty strong entries, I'd say, but I personally feel that Flashpoint has the better core story, and since both events have interesting tie-ins, I think the advantage goes to Flashpoint. Now, I was wrong, or at least not in the minority compared to the last round, so I could be very wrong. I am seeing the first couple votes going towards Flashpoint, though, so probably not. I mean, that was your guys' big question with the first round with Convergence, was whether or not the tie-ins count, and we didn't really have to worry about that at all for Flashpoint. So that kind of says a lot right there. And based on what some of you guys were saying about Flashpoint being among your favorites, I think it's pretty safe to say that's going to be our last semi-finalist and quite possibly a finalist. I gotta be really curious when it goes up against the CW one. Because yeah, we have two non-comic book entries here, which is kind of fun. I kind of threw them in to round up the tournament a little bit, and thought it would just be interesting and worth considering, and definitely wanted to include the Crisis on Two Earths movie, and therefore felt it fair to conclude everything else. But I have been surprised in a pleasant way at how many votes some of those media adaptations have gotten and how popular they've been. Cool stuff. Okay, so looks like the this round has gotten more competitive. We have uh, at least a couple of votes for Convergence, and it's like within range that they could tie with each other, kind of thing, for with Flashpoint. So curious stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've made it pretty clear how I will be breaking this tie if it comes to that and that sort of thing. But I will be interested to see what other people have to say and how that's going. Tevye saying, yeah, Flashpoint on its own is a good Flash story, but it really didn't need to lead to a reboot of the DC universe for New 52, which failed badly. That's fair. You could argue very easily that there's nothing in Flashpoint as a story or as like this crossover event that like leads into the development of this big reboot. You read this guy, Crisis on Infinite Earths. There's no question in my mind, like reading this story, that this leads to a massive reboot of all of reality as DC defined it at the time. Because you know, the, it's this big story. Universes are being shattered, whole worlds are dying, and while Flashpoint is big like that, the Flashpoint world is basically dying around Barry as he's trying to escape it. Uh, it doesn't really lead into the New 52 in any meaningful way, and that's a fair point to make. But yeah, how are we doing for time here? Yeah, we're a few minutes in, but about the same amount of votes as last time, so I might call it pretty soon. It's going to Flashpoint. That makes sense to me, and I'm not hearing a ton of defense for Convergence or anyone really making that point. Tevye saying, did anyone want to reboot for DC Comics? Because I didn't want that reboot for the DC universe. So here's the thing about that statement. Throughout, ever since the first Crisis on Infinite Earths, there have been periodic reboots. We've talked about them doing that with Zero Hour. I feel Infinite Crisis very much is along those lines too. After Flashpoint, we did the same thing pretty much with Death Metal, and we just talked about Death Metal. So you can say whether or not you wanted it or whether you think it was necessary, but this is just something DC does. It's part of their editorial philosophy, and I don't know if that's a super reasonable objection in light of all of that, if you get what I'm saying, because it's just what they do. It's the same thing with saying that Marvel needs to reboot when they generally haven't and probably won't ever reboot their comic book continuity. Or at least they've never done a full-fledged reboot the way DC does, and that's just always been kind of one of those quirks of the two companies, and I think that's fair. Tevi is saying Death Metal was technically an anti-crisis, and I don't care. That is Scott Snyder writing thing. That is not a real thing for me to care about, and most importantly, it's not on this website. You can tell, like, the website doesn't mean anything beyond it just being a way to definitively define what does and doesn't belong here. But here's the thing, my little babushkas. Nerd comic book nerds and just nerd culture in general loves to like split hairs over these rules. So I knew if I just said, huh, we're going by what this website says, then it just is allowed to be these crisis stories. And sure, we can argue all day about what does and doesn't count, but that's not the tournament. And the tournament is these stories. And, I'm not like jumping down your butt about it. I'm just kind of laughing because I knew it was going to happen. I knew like this conversation would happen with like, the viewer, like viewers in general, not you specifically, Tevia, or anything like that. And I just thought it was funny, like, yeah, it also doesn't matter. Like, oh, it's an anti-crisis. I don't care. Crisis is a word. It is a meaningless label for whatever the story needs to be. And I just thought it was fun to look at these specific type of events. I do agree the list isn't perfect, but I also strongly agree you're not going to give me a list that is. Either Heroes in Crisis isn't on it, and then you argue that like people are going to argue maybe it should, or it is on it, and then you have people like me who kind of feel like it might not belong there while stuff like Black as Night does. And I just think it's, interesting. Devia's, no, we're not going to talk about Marvel right now. All right, so we're going to end the poll and give that to Flashpoint. And then we move on to the semifinals. So, semifinals are interesting. Because there's like two, right? Yeah, okay. So, semifinal one. We have the Crisis on Two Earths movie. Devi is saying this is going to come close. That is fair, because it is going up against Infinite Crisis. Two heavy hitters. Crisis on Two Earths kind of sneaking in with the upset last round. And then going up against Infinite Crisis, which is a big story and has already tackled some heavy hitters in this tournament. So I am not sure where people are going to stand on this. Tevi is saying this is going to come close, and I agree. I think as much as I did end up tie-breaking for Crisis of Two Earths last time, I might lean to Infinite Crisis It's a heavy duty story. It's really interesting. As much as Crisis on Two Earths has moments and scenes and casting I really liked, and animation that was pretty cool too. Infinite Crisis has a lot going for it, and it's pretty interesting to make it a finalist. Right now, that seems to be where chat is leaning towards. But you know, I can appreciate the argument either way. Was it Caesar? Was it you saying that you watched that movie like every day growing up? Someone said that, and I get it because it's a fun movie. So I don't want to poo-poo it or be against it losing out to Crisis on Two Earths or anything like that. It's pretty interesting, and I'm very curious to see where people land. But right now, it's unanimous for Infinite Crisis, which is pretty interesting. Oh yeah, there's still like there are a few votes in already, so we shall see. I will let it go for a little bit. Um, but yeah, very interesting stuff so far. Tevi is saying Infinite Crisis actually had a lot of consequences for the entire DC universe. Like, don't get me wrong, Crisis on Two Earths is a great DC animated movie and amazing, but Infinite Crisis is an event, I think is what you're saying. Or, yeah, that's how I'm interpreting it. Um, but I agree. Like, Infinite Crisis is this big, sweeping thing that kind of comes and changes everything. And like Tevi says, don't get me wrong, Crisis on Two Earths is a fun movie, oh, here we go. But yeah, Tavia goes on to say, yeah, Infinite Crisis was amazing as an event. You know, it's funny, Infinite Crisis had a lot of great build up to it. I do agree. There's a sense to Infinite Crisis that, like, the world is ending, that these supervillains are in such a huge number and are planning something so big against the heroes that are in comparison so unprepared for this that it's like an overwhelming rush. And then you have this big tower that they've built that they're like putting people on and strapping to. It's just this broad and giant memorable story. So I definitely see why people have a lot of love for it. uh, I didn't really have any predictions for what would be a finalist, but it makes sense if Infinite Crisis is going to be one of them. Let's put it that way. Um, Devia says, plus it. Oh, yes. Uh, okay, so sorry, I just have trouble following the grammar of what you're saying, but I get the sense of it. So basically, like Tevye is saying, that there's actual consequences to Infinite Crisis over something like House of M at Marvel, which came out around this time. And yeah, I would say the consequences of Infinite Crisis are still felt to this day in characters like Superboy Prime or even just Connor Kent. And that's really cool too. It kind of or shows just how much of an effect, even though Infinite Crisis is like 20 years old now, it still has on people, and that's pretty cool of it. I definitely think that in my head, Crisis on Infinite Earths, like the original comic book, was gonna be a heavy hitter finalist, and I don't know if I had Infinite Crisis in the same mindset. And it's interesting to just kind of see that coming to play and it kind of beating out Crisis on Two Earths so thoroughly. But beat it out, it has. Like, yeah, it's been 5 minutes. Everyone's voted for Infinite Crisis. That's cool. That's how I would have voted. Like, I'm not disagreeing with it or anything. I'm just really surprised. That's really interesting. Tevi's saying to clarify, basically Infinite Crisis, and yeah, okay. I think I summarized what you were saying pretty much, right? um. Oh, okay. So, okay, there is something Tevi was saying that I didn't quite catch, which was yeah, House of M, like had great build up, or oh, sorry. House of M didn't have great build up and felt super rushed in its event compared to Infinite Crisis. And I would agree. Unlike other big events in both Marvel and DC, like Infinite Crisis had build up, but also didn't feel terribly rushed like some of these other event stories did. It really got to like kind of stretch its wings out and be this big game changing story. And that's pretty cool too. All right. Well, let's let's go to the second semifinal. That's exciting. So, semifinal two, Crisis on Infinite Earths for the from the CW versus Flashpoint, the comic book event. What a matchup. Two solid ones. Personally, like I had to think a little bit more about the last semifinal round. I think this one, I'm pretty heavily leaning towards Flashpoint myself. Like it's no big deal if that's not how the voting turns out, but I think I had. Oh, that is interesting though. Like when I think, oh man, maybe I'm wrong. Like that was my instinct, but the more I think about it, like Crisis on Infinite Earths was a lot of fun to watch, was very interesting, and Flashpoint isn't without its problems. Like Flashpoint has a lot of cool stuff going with for it, but it's a little paced weirdly. And we were just talking about how events can feel rushed. Parts of Flashpoint definitely feel rushed in my opinion. Oh yeah, and there we go. The first couple votes are going to the words Crisis on Infinite Earths. I thought for sure Flashpoint, but this might be this might be the other finalist is Crisis on Infinite Earths. Okay, right now it's tied, so we'll see. Interesting stuff. I might just have some water. Well, y'all vote. But I didn't know how long this stream was gonna be. It looks like we're looking at a solid 2 hours overall, which is fine. I just was like, okay. I've been talking nonstop for most of it. That's why it's like, yeah, some water. Yeah, Tevi is making a point that a few of you. Okay, hang on. Let me face the mic while I say this. Tevi is making a point that a few of you have made, and I do agree with. Like or not well, I don't agree with, but I could see this making a difference in the vote that like a lot of you do feel that Flashpoints should have stayed a Flash storyline, um but over like being a broader crisis. But that being said, I am looking at the voting and it has actually shifted towards Flashpoint. So we're only a couple minutes in, and we haven't quite gotten everyone's votes in, so I'm gonna let you guys do that. I'm looking for my slippers because my feet are cold. Okay, they're way over there. Um, we're gonna try something. What's this? I want. I would like. How do I? Okay. Huh. Well, I can't figure that out. That's okay then. I'm trying to do a streamy thing. But oh, here it is. Okay. Hold on a second. Tevio says, however, I will say this, though CW Crisis on Infinite Earths was a monumental achievement on TV and did feel like an actual event for people who were watching each show, myself included. Like the only weak point I can think of is the Batwoman show, but I blame more of the writers of that show than the actual crossover. That I do agree it was a weird part of it all. Um where sorry, I'm just checking something. Learning. They changed some YouTube stuff since I last streamed, so just checking out some features. Um it is weird because I didn't really ever watch the Batwoman show in full, just like random episodes like the Crisis on Infinite Earths. I wasn't caught up with Black Lightning, but I didn't really mind that too much. I found that the Crisis on Infinite Earths did have its own kind of continuity to it, and you didn't really need to know a lot about those other shows as long as you kind of just knew who those superheroes was. But that was a weakness. It is a change in the pacing of it and a weird part of it that you can be sitting and watching the Flash and working your way through the Flash show, and then you hit this random crossover thing where you have to track down these other episodes of other television shows just to understand what happens in this storyline, rewatching it and that sort of thing, it can make for a clunky experience at times. Now, there is something that we haven't mentioned that Tevia just brought up in chat. Kevin Conroy is Batman. That was so cool, and given that we've sadly lost him since then, that really has a special meaning and gives some extra weight to Crisis on Infinite Earths. So, like cameos like that I'd almost kind of forgotten about, really give Crisis on Infinite Earths in the CW an advantage and makes it feel like a special event and something that, even if you're not a fan of the Arrowverse, any fan of the DC comics could potentially enjoy and appreciate some of the cool cameos and things we get to see in this storyline. It is really special in that regard. Now, I am seeing a tie. Oh, never mind. Uh, uh, it looks like by a single vote, it's going towards Flashpoint. And it's been 5 minutes, so I'm feeling pretty good about that for that being our finalist. It was close, though. It was tied through most of our poll there and most of my talking. So interesting stuff. But yeah, I'm going to call it there. Oops. So we are going to the final round. Caesar saying, I feel like the first half of this tournament is a lot stronger than the second half. That's interesting. I assume you mean like the top and bottom, right? Or do you mean like the first part and the second part? I'm curious of what you meant, but if you're talking about top and bottom, that's interesting because it's completely random. And I don't even think you're necessarily wrong. There are so many heavy hitters at the top there. And then you have a lot of the weaker stories that happen to get to the bottom, like Dark Crisis, um, where was the other ones? Like Identity Crisis, Convergence, all being at the bottom here. I kind of, if that's what you're saying, I do think you make a good point. But yeah. Um, anyways, let's do it. Final round. Oh, Tevia also has a good point that like for what it does, the uh the CW like achieves a lot given its limited television budget. They did a like they adapted a big story and they made it feel big and they brought in a lot of like characters and stuff to make it feel like this multiversal event, and I definitely think that's pretty damn cool. All right, y'all ready? It's time. Oops, no, stop. Okay, I almost wrote it out wrong. It's time for the final round. Infinite Crisis versus Flashpoint. So I just happened to, yeah, okay. First couple votes look like they're going towards Infinite Crisis. Um, and even comparing the two, it's kind of interesting. I think what Caesar was saying makes a good point. Like, Flashpoint's a strong story, but it falters pretty hard against Infinite Crisis, and we just have a stronger top half. Um, so I don't want to call it just yet. Uh, the voting does change over time, and you know those 5 minutes do make a difference compared to how the voting starts, like in the first couple of minutes. But we might have Infinite Crisis win, and that's very interesting if true. I don't know if I would typically think of Infinite Crisis as the best of DC's Crisis out of what's on here. I think my personal favorites probably like would be stuff like Final Crisis, the CW Crisis on Infinite Earths, and even Flashpoint. So, and then probably the original Crisis on Infinite Earths and Death Metal are probably like my five favorite. And so, yeah, Infinite Crisis isn't on there. But that's why I tried to be neutral. I didn't want to discourage anyone. I'm not against Infinite Crisis winning, and I really think it's cool that this is where you guys are kind of leaning towards it, and that's cool. Dia Fox 7921 says my introduction to comics was 2003 Jeff Johns Teen Titans, which by the way, awesome series. I put out a review for that like I guess a while ago now, but I love the Jeff Johns Teen Titans. But Dia Fox is saying Infinite Crisis was huge for them. I get it. That's cool. And Caesar's saying out of the top, the only one I'd give Flashpoint to is Heroes in Crisis and maybe Zero Hour. Very interesting point, Caesar. Um, And yeah, it's kind of funny because that is entirely owed up to random chance. But the, as I kind of said earlier, there's no reason that we can't do this tournament again one day. It's kind of fun, and it's been interesting to see there. Oh, Fuzzy Cat has a great point where Superboy Prime punching the wall of reality is iconic and fun comic book nonsense. Hell yeah. That's like the most important, like that's like one of the most infamous parts of all of Infinite Crisis. But I kind of agree. Looking back on it now, like I used to kind of hate that moment. Now it is just fun and adorable. Let's get it. Let's get the image. Show it to me. Hell yeah! Here it is. It's so funny. Punch reality. Okay, sorry. Let me catch up on chat while I just had to. Tevye is saying, personally, I think Flashpoint as a Allen storyline is good, but I am more invested in Wally West Flash than Barry Allen growing up, and that's just your opinion. That's a good point, actually. There is that side of it that, like, Wally West was the Flash for so long that him being the main Flash again over Barry Allen remains a point of contention with a lot of people that like still want that to happen, and something like Flashpoint really leans into Barry Allen being the Flash and that sort of thing, and yeah, I think a lot of you guys have kind of said throughout this video, Flashpoint isn't really a crisis on the level of these other stories. And I think that's where Infinite Crisis kind of takes this pretty heavily. Um, Caesar is asking if I plan to return to grading. I think so, but different. I I really am not feeling as enthusiastic about doing necessarily the entire second half of Teen Titans, but I don't want to rule it out either. I will tell you guys, we've been doing things differently here at the channel. I think you've noticed that. I'm back. I want to be making videos much more regularly now, and I have been consistently doing so for a couple of months, which is nice because I haven't been able to achieve that in years. Um, but I am going about making videos and how I pick topics and how I'm doing that stuff differently. And so that kind of has led to a pause in most of my active ongoing series. Now, that being said, the pause was already lifted on Age of Apocalypse. I am going to be working on finishing that series up entirely. And so I don't want to be like, oh, I'm never doing Great in the Titans again or anything like that. Don't worry. Like I'm not saying no. I'm not saying anything like that. What I'm leaning towards is changing how I go about the grading videos so that I can maybe just start doing random arcs and other characters and other series and kind of do it as a more like less chronological series and more of one that reflects uh the times, like I can do different characters. If like a Superman movie's coming out, I can do an interesting Superman era or something like that. That's kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. Like, and that's me just being transparent about how I feel about it all right now. Long answer to that question, but I thought that's a fair a question to ask, and I think that's a fair thing to say, hopefully. Caesar also said Infinite Crisis is important for bringing back Jason Todd and most importantly Doom Patrol. Agree. And that's specifically what that punching the reality moment does. But it's interesting because by punching reality, it's Infinite Crisis's version of doing the soft reboot that Crisis on Infinite Earths did, Flashpoint did, and what kind of defines a lot of these DC crises stories, and arguably what defines the best of these crises stories, even. All right, and then Tevia says, plus we did see Superboy Prime do that in the Superman books recently in DC KO tie-ins, which was really fun. I did not know that. I will have to check that out. I've heard about DC KO. I have not gotten around to it yet, so that's pretty cool to hear. That's funny. Tevia saying, but Barry Allen of Flash, unfortunately, thanks to Flashpoint, keeps getting storylines adapted in live action or animated, which is just dumb, and DC needs to stop adapting Flashpoint every time. That's fair. It's I'm pretty done with seeing Flashpoint adaptations at this point. Uh, I what am I trying to say with that? So, like, we have had the Flash TV show do an adaptation of Flashpoint. We've had the animated Flashpoint movie, and that's enough for me. I think even one could argue the Flash film, the live action movie, it took borrowed and like kind of played with ideas from the Flashpoint storyline as well. So we are done. We don't ever need to do an adaptation of Flashpoint as well. Yeah, Tevye said that Flashpoint or the Flash movie was the final nail in the coffin for him when in regards to Flashpoint. I agree. um, Tevye is saying, "I thought this channel was dead, but I'm glad you're back." You know what? I will tell you something about that. Since we're I wanted to end this half an hour ago, but since we're well beyond that point, I will tell you guys a little thing about that. So, I am now an engaged man. That happened over the course of this summer, and I have to give my partner a lot of credit. I've kind of had a pretty severe reduction in hours at work lately, and was feeling kind of bummed about that and applying for a lot of jobs and really worried about money. And my fiance now, Sabrina, was the one who kind of said, "Hey, you idiot. Like, you're only really happy when you're at least somewhat actively making these YouTube videos, either partially or fully. Why don't, when you don't have shifts, instead of applying to jobs and stressing about that, focus on this?" And not only has that worked really well, but thanks to this new philosophy for picking topics, thanks to this new approach I have had to making videos, the channel is actually making a decent amount of money, which means I can lean into it more and do more of this. So I really just have to have special credit to my fiance Sabrina for doing that. That's the only reason I'm back. It probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. I needed that kick in the pants to really kind of encourage me to not be afraid to make videos again and to start to make myself a presence once more online. And I really am grateful for all of that. Grateful for you guys for checking out some of the new videos that are out. Grateful for your support. Grateful for y'all participating in this stream and being encouraging with that stuff. I'm feeling a lot of joy in all of that right now and really appreciating all of that. And I'm glad to be back too, Tevia. So Tevia saying Infinite Crisis, I thought did soft reboot way better than Flashpoint in my opinion. Yeah, and I think you're not alone in that based on the results of this poll. And we'll close out the tournament at some point soon, but I'll just leaving it up for now. Tevia says, yeah, oh yeah, I read that one already. Caesar says, I was going to say if you plan on bringing back the grading teams, you should do the Doom Patrol or Suicide Squad. A lot of great history, but hasn't continually been published since the Silver Age. All solid points, and that I think, yeah, like that's the idea. Is I want to do stuff like that, branch out, go in different directions, cover Marvel and DC in fun different ways, without getting myself bogged down in every single era. I thought, and I still do think it's interesting to look at like a whole run of a character or team's history. It's just so difficult to stay on that and stay as enthusiastic about it. I have also found ways to kind of cheat out little things. If you go and watch my relatively new Worst of DC Rebirth video, I talk about Teen Titans and Titans, and I am basically directly pulling my opinions and some of the thoughts I was going to share for those rounds of grading the Titans. So it gives you a little sense of like, oh, okay, this is how those grades would have gone and stuff like that. So we're like, I haven't deleted anything. I have all of my thoughts on the Titans series still sitting around. I haven't written out the whole series, but I do have all the grades lying around and stuff like that. So I don't want to never say never. You never know, right? And then I'm seeing a bunch of people congratulating me for my engagement. Thank you. A lot of kind words there. I really appreciate that, guys. It was a beautiful engagement. I can here. Hold on a second, because it wouldn't be hard to find. Wait for it. We did. Oh, they're gone. Okay. Well, I don't have the video is easily accessibly anymore, but yeah, we got engaged in Jamaica. It was very romantic. I was gonna show you guys like a little picture of where we got engaged. It's a very, very beautiful place. But yeah, and like it all kind of worked out. A good chunk of my family was there, so it was really fun. Um, Tevye was saying you could also grade Spider-Man books or X-Men. Granted, Spider-Man right now is not in a good place right now, similar to Venom, which is also awful. That's all interesting to hear. There was a plan after grading the Titans to grade Amazing Spider-Man as a series. So maybe I should look into that. The Dan Slott stuff might be interesting to talk about, or even some of the new Spider-Man, because hey, no one hates like. There's nothing wrong with the negative, angry review if need be. All right, but we're caught up in chat. Even managed to sneak in some schmaltzy moments that I think are kind of nice to close out the video. And surprising no one at this point, because it's been, it was gonna head in this direction for a while now. We are going to end the tournament. Oops, I did that completely wrong. Hang on. With a score of 86 to 14, not the other way around. Infinite Crisis is the winner of our tournament. So, hey, very cool stuff. Not the results I expected, but not for a negative reason. Just a surprise in the most pleasant way possible. And so, yeah, thank you guys for voting. I think a lot of the most recent, like the last 10 minutes I've been talking has been a pretty good way of wrapping out the video, talking about some stuff going on in my life and just all the gratitude I spilled out everywhere for everyone. But I do kind of want to close out. Like, one flaw with this is I didn't have a ton of images lying around for, geez, page by page, panel by panel annotation of this series. So there's a lot of cool analysis for Infinite Crisis out there, I guess. Um, just a funny thing to find in the wiki. What I was looking for though is, oh, okay. Usually they have like a gallery on these wikis for us to look at. Sure, cover gallery. It's just nice to close out looking over some of the Infinite Crisis images to close out on. Because that's another thing we didn't really talk about, but some really beautiful and creative art came out of this. We talked about that a bit with the Tower of Doom thing that happens in this story, but I just wanted to express a little bit of love for Infinite Crisis, our winner for today. And yeah, thank you, Dia Fox. You and Tevya both said nice things about my engagement, but uh, they were saying, super glad to hear stuff's going up, super glad to see you're back. Um, and yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad we got to have a fun stream like this. Expect more in the future. I don't know if they're going to be exactly like this. I do want streams though where you guys are involved in some way. We had fun back in the old days of doing streams where like, I'd just do a review or whatever, and I'm not ruling out the possibility of, getting on for 10 minutes and talking about a comic or whatever like that. But by and large, I want to shift streams towards like you guys having more of a voice or being involved in some way. Um, and I think that's a fun way of doing streams going forward, because that's the whole point is I'm live. So you guys can participate in interesting ways like this. Tevius closing out with Infinite Crisis did give us Blue Beetle Jamie Reyes, which is really awesome. And that's another interesting thing about Infinite Crisis is all these things that created, like bringing back Red Hood and Jason Todd and stuff like that. Cool stuff. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. I'm gonna probably close it out there at a solid stream and a really fun time to come back to everyone. And yeah, really appreciate Tevya, Caesar, Diafox, and some of the other people who participated throughout the stream. Thank you so much. It was good stuff. Um, Tevye was saying I could add in some guests, which is a fun idea. I do kind of want to do something like that too. I assume you mean like comic booky people, because I do kind of have some industry connections still. So we can look into maybe doing something like that. But yeah, thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.